Okay, I hit record. You hit play. You know what that means? This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown, and I appreciate you doing that. I appreciate that you've hit play. Thank you. Welcome to you, whoever you are. Not gonna lie, it feels inappropriate to try and bring some big fun energy to the intro this week. I've been really doing my best to not let the anxieties and fears that we're dealing with overshadow too much of what happens when I'm speaking to you, because I want to try to resonate the energies and songs that I want to hear and not be echoing the horrors that are instilling so much dismay. But it was freaking hard this week. It was overwhelming, the uptick. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who felt it. And it's interesting because we were talking on the show a few weeks back about fields of collective energy and experience. And I'm sure we're all reading the same news stories, so we see what's happening, and there's reasons for concern, perhaps. And then there's also something else I want to propose, because I turned away from the news for a couple of days this week. I can't pay attention to that for a while, and tried to really focus on, like I'm saying, the songs I want to hear. And it was not easy. I felt it was just all around me, the kind of sadness and the fear, and it was very hard to escape it. And what I observed was that the moments in which I was able to really relinquish this effort of trying to be in the world and just feel my way into the experience of my wondrous life in this moment, the brief glimmers of time that I did find my way there this week were very intense. That, given how difficult it was to actually tame all those vrittis, all the fluctuations, and again, just fear and all of it, just to see if I could sort it and direct my attention to this feeling of me. And in those moments, it was just like a golden light shining down. I mean, it was really intense. You could just feel the longing and the crying out of so many. And I couldn't help but have the strong impression that this ordeal we are experiencing holds the possibility of being some sort of initiatory moment in lots of different ways, perhaps. And this is something that we're going to definitely be talking about next week. The initiatory moment that we are experiencing together collectively. And in one regard, my conversation today with Tori Lunden is about this, but in a more like microscopic way that's specific just to yoga teachers, perhaps, because Tori has written this book called How Not to Teach Yoga. And as I've been discussing on the show for at least the last year, I think that there's a real evolution going on for a lot of us out there. A lot of yoga teachers have had time and space to reflect on what they were doing and what they might want to do going forward in ways that we hadn't for decades previously. And I think that the aftermath of a lot of the revelations about teachers and all the abuse histories that we've talked about on this show, and all of us trying to reconcile those, and all of these new ways of engaging practice and evolving ourselves as practitioners and teachers. Well, Teri's on the wavelength too, and she wrote this book, which I felt really captured a lot of it, a lot of what I've been grappling with, and I know a lot of you have been grappling with, and it was very affirming and useful to connect with her and talk about what she wrote, and I'm glad that you're going to get to hear that. Today, real quick before we get to that, let me mention that the year-long teacher training I am starting on January 17th does have some spaces left, but not that many. So if you were considering and you haven't yet reached out to find out more information, you might want to get on it. You can go to jbrownyoga.com/training and fill out the 3-question application there, or just send me an email and I will be very happy to send you some more info on that. There is still a little bit of time to get in on it, but the time is winding down soon. So again, if you want to find out more, go to jbrownyoga.com/training. Also, let me express a little love to Podcast Premium subscribers. Today, I want to say thank you to Lucy Kanani and Kathy Davis. Once again, 2 names I recognize well. Thank you, Lucy and Kathy, and everyone else out there who has become a Podcast Premium subscriber. We do rely upon listener support, and you can help be a part of that by becoming a Podcast Premium subscriber for as little as $5 a month. It also gives you access to the full archives, but really it is the way that we keep this boat afloat, and we are very grateful to all of you. Thank you so much. If you want to find out more about becoming a Podcast Premium subscriber, or any of my other stuff, my regular ongoing live stream classes and teacher meetings and all the stuff that I'm doing, including the archives of this show and my blog and everything, all my stuff is at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all. I think that's it. I think I'm just going to trust that that is good enough. I will touch base with you on the other side. But let's do it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Tori Lunden. Hello?
Hello.
Hello, Tori.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Here we are. Out of the ether, landing.
Yes.
Voice to voice.
Yes. I love it. I much prefer voice to video, so I appreciate this.
Well, in a way, I'm not surprised to hear that, because I did read through about 85% of your book.
Oh, okay.
And I'll be honest, I had to skim through the last few chapters this morning, but I'll definitely go back and read them proper, because I really enjoyed it. And not only did I enjoy it, it was very affirming and helpful in a lot of ways.
Well, good. That's what I wanted it to be for folks.
Well, it was for me. And I felt like that had a lot to do with, I don't know, what your personality and what you brought of yourself to the book and the stories that you told. I saw myself in all of them. And I wondered, and this is sort of kind of maybe a place to begin in a way, is I wondered if that was generational. And I was curious how, sort of similar we might be in age, or even how similarly we might have sort of come into the yoga thing.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So and the fact that you said that you like just voice to voice rather than video, me too. I do a lot of video calls and I have to record myself, I have to be on and I have to see myself in order to do that. And it takes a lot of energy to like not be focused on how I look and really focused on the communication that I'm trying to do through this technology. And if it's off and it's just like I'm having a phone call, like at another time in my life when we didn't have video calls, I feel like I can listen better.
Yeah, I'm really similar, where it's like if I'm also just really prone to visual distractions. So if it's like focusing on another person talking, I can do that. But if I'm also seeing a little video of myself in the corner, it's so hard not to just keep looking back at that and coming out of the moment.
Yeah, even if you manage to do it, you have to expend a bunch of energy in the process.
Yeah, it's just way more work.
Yeah. Well, another thing I was curious about, you mentioned in your book that you started out in social work and you didn't continue to go in that direction. So before we kind of get to the substance of the book, I was kind of curious, why didn't you carry on in social work? What went wrong with that for you? Or why did you not feel like that was the calling to follow?
Well, I don't know if anything went wrong. I have absolutely no regrets about studying social work and the work I did frontlines. Eventually, I got into policy work because when I was doing frontline social work, primarily with people with mental health struggles and helping them like reintegrate into society, coming out of hospital settings, and often trying to integrate into a society that didn't necessarily appreciate them or support them. I decided to get way more into the policy side because it's like, well, rather than just constantly applying Band-Aids, what can I do to make more long-term solutions? And while I really enjoyed policy work, it meant 8 hours, 5 days a week sitting at a desk, which I found out through the experience over 2 years really does not work for me. So then it was one of these kind of like, it's like a cascade of events. I was saving up to do my master's degree, and it looked like one day my boss came in and was like, it looks like the funding for your position might be cut. I was doing a lot of like policy research and helping doing some of the writing and consultations and everything. And I had, after the initial shock, this a moment of, I think I'm okay with that. I was like, I believe in doing my part for the goodness of humanity and the less suffering of people. But this work day in, day out in this setting is not making me happy at all. And actually the only thing that really sparks any joy in my life right now is the once, twice a day I go to the local yoga studio and practice.
Gotcha.
So, and kind of in the space of a week, and I was in my mid-20s. So it's definitely, I think maybe a more mid-20s thing to do when this happened, when it's like, well, I'm just going to take the money I was going to use to do my master's, and I'm going to go to India and study yoga for a year.
And that money probably lasts you a long time in India, longer than it would here or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. And I have played with going back and doing my master's since. I love the theory of the profession and the application and the different ideas. And since I'm pushing 40. So in the years since I graduated, even the discussions around trauma are so much different and so much more in depth and so much more focused on the body and the nervous system than when I was in school. So I still love the material. I'm just, I'm really not good at sitting at a desk. That's what a lot of it boils down to, honestly.
Do you remember, like, what year are we talking about when you go to India?
That was 2008.
Okay. So, I had a similar experience, but it was 10 years earlier than that. But it was a similar kind of thing of, well, I know I don't want to work in an office.
Yeah.
I don't know what I want to do, but I know I definitely don't want to work in the office. And I don't know about you, but I had my own traumas. My mom had died, and yoga was this one thing that seemed to be a place I could start to work through things that I needed to work through or something.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think so many of us come to it when it's, I mean, maybe about like, well, it's a cheap class or my hamstrings hurt or whatever, but it can become such a lifeline to something more, to something deeper, to many things. I think most of us come to it out of just a need for something, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting to me that you went to India, because I went to India in 1998, but I had already been sort of practicing yoga for several years in New York City. And what was happening in New York City and it was sort of like the very early beginnings before it really started to get mainstreamed. Mm-hmm. But all of my teachers had gone to India and met gurus and then come back and then opened storefronts and had their pictures up on the altars or whatever.
Yeah.
But you going to India instead of going to grad school is a little different than doing Yoga Works teacher training, probably.
True. I had been to India once before. When I had first graduated from university, I was originally trying to go to Africa, and then I ended up in India at working at a non-for-profit, and it was doing the whole volunteer tourism, which there's been lots of very good critiques of how problematic that can be. Mm-hmm. And I ended up kind of out of, I don't know, luck or like the grace of God at this non-for-profit that had been started by a group of Indian women who'd left a Western not-for-profit because they were sick of seeing people Westerners trying to save slum kids by teaching them how not to be Indian. So that was, I mean, we could go into
we could get to that because you do handle cultural appropriation in a very, like I said, constructive way in the book. But I hear what you're saying. That sounds like there's all kinds of murkiness to that.
Yeah, and they, I mean, it was eye-opening. It kind of crushed my white savior complex in the best of ways, and it also, I think that was the beginning of me falling out of love a little bit with the myth of social work, which really is not unlike the myth of yoga, where it's like, this is this thing that's gonna make me a better person and make,
and save the world
in the world. Yeah. Oh, of course, save the world. That's a given. And again, like what you said before, I appreciated about maybe some of it is just age thing. I mean, we all are quite starry-eyed in our 20s, and
well, partly that, and partly I feel like there's been an evolution of yoga, and that actually is what I would say to you, even as an introduction. I meant to say this at the beginning when we first started, but we just got into it, which is that I feel like, I came into my adulthood essentially alongside like yoga coming to the West into this mainstreaming thing. And I feel that, at the beginning, there was like these authorities for yoga. There were these like yoga masters and these gurus, and they were the authorities and they were the knowledge holders, and teachers who came before me, like I'm like the bridge generation. They were the ones who went there, like I said, and came back and opened up Jiva Mukti Yoga Center on 2nd Avenue where I started. And, it seemed to me that over time, like a lot of people, and like you write about in the book, a lot of these things have really come to be seen very differently. And a lot of these teachers fell from their proverbial grace or whatever. And a lot of us have really been having to reconcile, even teachers who weren't gurus, we learned things that helped us, and then they did fucked up shit. You know what I mean? Like,
it's not funny, but funny. That's a really blunt way to put it. Yeah.
Theo Wildcroft talks about this post-lineage yoga time, and I think there's something really to that, where we're having to look to new places for what our yoga is and to have authenticity in it. And I feel like your book really captured that and encapsulated it in a way that was very clear. So I do think that there's something generational. The reason I asked you what your age was or whatever, because people who are coming into yoga now compared to when I came into it in the early 90s, it's a very different situation.
Yeah, definitely. Just so many things I could say to that. I mean, in some ways, I think like our eyes are way more open. Like, I don't know about you, but when I started doing yoga, like, I didn't even know cultural appropriation existed, what it was. And it wasn't until more like it started becoming part of social work. And even then, like it didn't even cross my mind that would also be part of the yoga I was practicing, or that would influence it. Like it took, I don't know, like the power of human denial, I think is kind of like a sub-theme of the book, of how powerful it is when there's something we don't want to look at.
Well, I think that's true. I also think it maybe depends on, I don't know, what teachers you were emulating necessarily. Like, I know you write about in the book about like the wannabe guru. And yes. I certainly had some experience. I never really took on full guru-ness or whatever, but I definitely did the, like, I have the answers.
Yeah. And were you similar to me in that it was like, it wasn't necessarily conscious. It was just like, well, this is what we do, right? This is what a yoga teacher is. Like, I know for me, I 110% thought like, well, no, like I'm just supposed to act like I know everything.
Well, that's true. That's what I mean. We were emulating a certain even pedagogy or something, but it was, we didn't come from that culture, which is what you're talking about in terms of the cultural appropriation. But I did end up aligning with some teachers from Desikachar tradition, and it was a lot about adapting to your individual needs, and it was supposed to be specific to you and what made sense to you and your culture. So there were like avenues where I think I was taught a respect for the origins of these things, you know, in a way that maybe wasn't if you went to YogaWorks teacher training in 2010 or something, you know? Yeah.
Well, you make a good point where it's that difference between respecting the tradition and like emulating what we think it's supposed to be. It's a huge, huge difference.
Well, it's true. But I will say, I mean, I didn't do a lot of chakra talk because I always didn't want to sound like I was flaky or something, but I definitely like made shit up and pulled shit out of my ass just to sound cool using jargon and stuff. Like I definitely did that one, and you nailed that. Yeah. And it was like, and you nailed, I think, you said because I felt I was allowed to do this because I was me.
Yeah.
And I felt I did that too. And that's the privilege, you know, the
100%.
The privilege of the reason it's okay for me to just make stuff up and call it yoga is because I'm an artist and this is my personal expression. But I was definitely like full of it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a huge disservice that we do to ourselves and others as you get these white middle class yoga teachers where it's like we really mistaken ourselves and each other, or we don't recognize the difference between like respect and accountability and just blind belief in ourselves.
Right.
Where it's like, well, no, like I'm believing in my own intuition and the teachings, and this is flowing out of me. Like rather than, well, is it, Tori? Or are you just talking a bit of shit and part of you knows you can get away with it because of being able-bodied, kind of good-looking, you're white, and you're in a classroom full of people who know even less than you do. And if you act in a certain way, they're just going to assume you know what you're talking about. All right, like those are, I don't think, discussions anyone likes to have with themselves. I know that the book is full of those, but I think they're so necessary. I mean, for our own personal growth, for yoga to continue to progress in a way that doesn't dull it down.
And it has integrity.
Yes.
And, you know, you go on to talk about how you talk about influence and manipulation and charisma.
Yeah.
And here's something where I feel like there's a need for clarity, maybe just for me, but maybe other people too.
Sure.
Because it's interesting to me, like you refer to charisma as manipulation light, which I really liked. I get it too, because on some level, here's where my confusion is. Like, charisma is often like really effective and useful. And there was a time where I saw it as a bad thing, as like an ego, you know, and I was in this sort of philosophical bent of yoga that was about destroying your ego.
Right.
And in a way, you know, even when I think about your book, like there's a lot of charisma in your writing, like your humor and your personality that comes through is a lot what made it resonate for me. And that's not bad at all. That's like made it more effective in its communication. Mm-hmm. So in a way, at the same time, I also know, you know, I was talking about like being full of shit. The reason I was full of shit though was sometimes because I wanted to be helpful, even when I didn't know what I was talking about, but also it was about wanting people to like me. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there is something manipulative about that in a like, not like I'm trying to hurt you way. Like I don't intend to hurt anybody, but there's something manipulative about presenting what's not really the truth because I want people to like me.
Right. If I understand kind of the question you're asking, and I think I do, it's not an entirely good or entirely bad thing. It's this, for me, because I do acknowledge that I am quite charismatic. And a lot of that developed out of what I needed to do to get through my childhood. That's my background of that, is I learned to kind of entertain people, make them chuckle, like make them feel good about me, make them feel good about myself or themselves. And it's not a bad skill. It's a great skill for teaching, like to help like settle a room, put people at ease, open them up to what you're teaching. But it's keeping an eye on, am I relying on charisma and charisma alone instead of why am I actually here? Am I here because I want these people to like me? Am I here because I want Jay and his listers to like me? Or is my charisma a tool that I can use responsibly to help get my message across?
Right.
In teaching, if that answers your question. Like I think it's a different line for everybody. Like I think a teacher without any charisma could still be an okay teacher, but they wouldn't be that engaging. And that's fine. They're probably, I don't know, I think it would take an incredibly self-assured person to have maybe no charisma at all. I'm not even sure what that would look like, actually, but it's interesting to think about.
Well, I guess, yeah, because the charisma comes out of someone's personality, right? Or their, you know? Well, what I will say is, and I think you kind of nailed this on the head, is that if you are, even if it's well-intentioned, full of shit and putting forth like an untrue image of yourself, there's a fakeness to that. And then that is absolutely what leads to like the bypassing that's been happening over the years in yoga classes, because if you get challenged in some way and you don't have anything to really back up what you're doing, because it's kind of it's on like not a firm foundation, then you reflexively bypass and do these, that's when the manipulation really kind of comes in there.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe an interesting way to think about it or to gauge it is, how comfortable or how willing are we to let that charisma fail now and then? Like if that mask drops and our class sees us, is that okay? Are we okay with that? Like, because it's so often, I think charisma is, it's a mask to hide vulnerability, to hide I actually can't answer that question, or I'm actually having kind of a bad day, or like, all of the different very human things that can come up in life, and especially like teaching. So are you willing to occasionally not be charismatic? I think that might be an interesting way to gauge it person to person. Like, I have this tool, I can use it, but am I willing also to not use it sometimes?
Right. And would what you're offering still be of value if you weren't cracking jokes or something? Yeah. Are you a comedian?
And I mentioned that in the book. Like when I teach, I'm a funny person. That's just, it's kind of how I am.
You said, because sometimes that's just a way to make it more fun, like, and playful. Yeah. And I do that too.
Mm-hmm. And that's like our teaching style is our teaching style. But then also just keeping an eye on, and it really is kind of me holding myself accountable. That's the responsibility of it, is pretty much on me to be like, okay, did I rely on humor a bit more today than actually like addressing anything that was needed in the class? And like some days I do, and it's like, okay, like today was not my best work, but okay, what happened and what can I do better in the future?
Right. You wrote that too, that it's the problem sometimes comes in when it's not always like what you're teaching, but if you're being too charismatic, then it almost becomes like this flippant approach to something that's actually super important or whatever, or there's a line there of making it fun, or like kind of not holding it in the same careful, reverent way we ought to, or something.
Yeah, well, the content and also potentially the people. I mean, when personal experience again, so this may or may not apply to you or the people who are listening. When I fall into like over charisma, I can't really connect with anyone in any meaningful way, because it's almost like this dance of like jokes and quips and how to almost like feign connection with this kind of like likability. But there's no deeper sense.
And it's easier in Zoom meetings sometimes too. Shit.
There's no deeper sense. And I, especially if you're teaching yoga that isn't like, okay, this is a noon hour gym class and people just want to move and breathe and that's it. Like that's okay. But if it's any kind of like that deeper part of yoga, there does need to be some deeper connection. Or like you said, it can easily just fall into bypassing and we're all playing these parts that we think we're supposed to play. So in that way, I think when that almost manipulative part of charisma, if we rely so much on that and that takes up so much of the space, then there can't be that deeper vulnerability, that deeper connection, which ultimately creates like growth in our practice.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right. And I think there's something about, for me, there was like a maturation or like a settling in me so that it was less about the performance and my ability to entertain or something, and more about the experience that other people are having.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Which I think part of it is just a little bit is aging as a person, just time teaching. Like I tried really hard in the book. And I mean, with writing anything, there's what you put out there, and then you just have to acknowledge that everyone's going to read it totally differently and it's out of your control. But that none of this is anything that we get right or perfect. The whole idea of the book came about is because we all had like childhoods and relationships, and, you know, if you believe in past lives, then even like past life stuff. And we are all messy humans with different degrees of messy stuff that maybe we are aware of, aren't aware of, all of the above, and it can come out with different people in all sorts of weird and wonderful ways. So how do we put some very compassionate boundaries around ourselves and reflective tools around ourselves, so that when we're in this position of power, which being at the front of a classroom always is, where we can minimize the potential negative effect we can have on other people. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the whole crux of it, is like, we are all flawed. How can we compassionately do better?
Right. And there's challenges, because there's huge conventions, and then there's even sort of like market forces involved. So I even think about how for a long time, when you were going to promote whatever you were doing, it was a picture of you doing your best pose, looking as awesome as you could look.
Yeah.
And then we all regret that, and we all pulled them off our website years ago. You know, right. We all tried to have pictures of other people with different bodies doing it, you know?
Yeah.
Like I made a video of this program that I was teaching, and it was just me doing it. And when I did it back in 2007, I wanted it to be as like technically precise as I could make it and make it look as beautiful as I could. And then some years back, like 2 years ago, maybe, or not even a year and a half ago. Yeah, 2 years ago, but right before the pandemic, I decided that I needed to redo it with other people doing the program and not me. Because that's not what it really looked. I don't want people to try to make it look like I look.
Right.
And it just seems to me that the challenge is that there is sort of even like this convention of, the teacher demonstrates. And like when I first started doing online classes in 2017, it wasn't two-way. And I would be demonstrating everything, just me doing it by myself in front of the camera. And I think that now I don't even demonstrate. A lot of times I'm just sitting in a chair watching.
Yeah.
Which seemed crazy to me. Like, who's going to pay for an online video class of me sitting in a chair looking at them?
Yeah.
But it was something had to do with demonstrations. And you mentioned that in the book about that convention of, I'm the teacher, I'm going to show you how to do it. Look at my body. That's changed, don't you think?
I really do. And I think that's a lot of the work around that certain people, a lot through social media, have been doing around like body variation and accessible yoga. And like, it's been leaps and bounds in the last 5 years. Like the paradigm shifted a lot. And I say that, but also sometimes I get, the algorithm keeps us kind of locked in our own little group. So then now and then I just Google #yoga and realize, okay, but there's still a lot of the other stuff out there too.
It's true. I mean, I got off of social media a couple years ago.
Congratulations.
I just did because it wasn't, and I found I'm kind of on this 1,000 true fans idea. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's not important to like try to get to everybody or as many people as possible. Just the people who are like the right people to be with.
I believe that 100%. Yeah. I mean, that's when I wrote this book, it was like, well, I finished it mostly for me just because I started it and I needed to get it out. And I'm like, well, there's a lot of people who will read this and either just not like it or not agree with it. But I know there is a niche of yoga teachers out there that will use this and appreciate it and it will help them. And that's who I'm writing it for.
I think that's right. Like I said, I think there's been, right now I have this teachers call it's a weekly call. I've been doing it for 3 years now. And there's teachers from all over the world that have been in there with me. And there's common among all of us is like a reevaluation, as I said at the beginning, happening. Where like I'm doing a teacher training this coming year for the first time since I let go of my center in 2017, because I kind of swore off doing teacher trainings.
Right.
I was like, they're fucking bullshit. I'm done with this. Fucking 200 hours shit. That's not how
Pyramid
yoga works.
Scheme.
We're fucking killing it. So I was done with it. But I've decided to take it back on again, and that's a longer conversation. But I've been looking at video of me doing teacher trainings in 2011. And, some of it stands, but a lot of it is just cringy as hell, because so many of the tools that I was taught are things that we were utilizing back then. They're not useful to where we are now. And the teachers are having to reevaluate that and be in an uncertain place because of that.
It really does take a certain amount of, I don't know, the word that comes to mind is grace, or giving ourselves and each other grace. Because like from my first training, or even like 5 years ago when I was teaching, it's like, it's cringy. It's like, but also I didn't know any better. And so it's just this gradual progression. And I'm sure if we both look back in 10 years again, it'll be like, oh, really? I was doing that? Well, didn't I know better? Well, I guess not.
Yeah. Well, I think, I don't know. I have a feeling I'll feel much better about what I'm doing now in 10 years than I feel about how I was doing 10 years ago, only because I feel like it has come to a new place where, I don't know. I always had this thing. I mentioned my yoga had a lot to do with my mom's death. And I, at some point, decided I wanted to be able to teach a class that my mom could come to.
Right.
And that kind of, you wrote it. I'm going to quote you. You wrote, "The hardest work for me as teacher has been owning the potential within myself to misuse the authority granted to me when I stand in front of a class."
Yeah.
And so that there is a certain inherent authority. I'm facing this way, everyone's facing the other way, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And at a certain point, it became more important to make sure that whatever's happening in that class is good for the people who are coming, and it's not about my performance or me being able to make them laugh.
Yeah. Was that a gradual shift for you, or did you have like a light bulb moment?
There was a couple of light bulb moments. I actually remember one specific class where I had like come up with this really awesome sequence the night before that I thought was going to be really impressive. And then when I got there that morning, there was only 7 people there, and maybe 2 of them could do most of what I planned. And the rest of the people there was like nowhere in there. It made no sense for them, Right. And I didn't have another plan. So I did what a lot of teachers do, I think, or was I just taught to the 2 people who could do it. And then I tried to be as encouraging as possible to all the other people who felt shitty because it was not for them at all.
Yeah.
But I felt it. I saw it. I saw that, oh no. And I felt like this was about me coming up with a sequence. This wasn't about the people who were there and what they were going to get. Yeah. And I was like, I had a huge dilemma, and then you start to try to figure it out. But there weren't always a lot of models, because the conventional thing was the charismatic teacher who came to the front of the room and went, oh, and then, it was like the whole thing that was going on.
But not a lot of models for how to, I guess this is an overused term, but hold space or lead a class.
Right.
But also not a lot of models for how do I modify and give variations to poses, but also then if someone is never going to be able to put their foot behind their head, then what does that actually mean? And it can almost be like this down the rabbit hole of questions of okay, where do I go to find this? For me personally, it meant I ended up doing a lot of things or studying a lot of things that weren't yoga, because at the time, yoga just wasn't quite there yet, or it wasn't as big a part of the conversation about, does it always have to be Warrior One, or what is Warrior One?
And is your knee being over your ankle really safer?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that old favorite.
Right. Well, a lot of my friends, they all started exploring different somatic movement techniques, and then started wondering whether they should call what they were doing yoga anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But it was still yoga for a lot of us. It was for me still.
Yeah, I think if it's still that, for me, so much of, and this is just my own opinion, it really is the intention you're taking towards what you're doing. And sometimes I think intention gets overused, but that intention of yoga is I'm attempting to be in my body with whatever I'm doing with my body, which was not me for years when I did Ashtanga. I could do tons of great stuff, but my head was in the clouds and my body was doing whatever malleable position.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.